these challenges to protect the future of our food. Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
America says President Putin is preparing for a long war in Ukraine, which even victory in the east may not end. But Ukraine says their counter-offensive has pushed out Russian forces north of Kharkiv, recapturing some villages around that key city.
Assistance.
Also in the programme, a prominent Palestinian-American journalist is shot dead while covering an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank. Shireen Abu Akleh worked for Al Jazeera. They say she was shot by the Israeli military. Israel suggests. That's all coming up here on Impact. Ukraine, which she says has become an important location during the war.
It's become a logistics and humanitarian hub, providing refuge for the families fleeing the intensifying Russian onslaught in eastern, stopping here to get people who leave with nothing and coming here and needing everything as they wonder where and when they will be allowed to return to their homes. It's day 77 now of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russians continue to make slow but steady progress. Let's get an update from our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse. He joins us from Kyiv, the capital to the north. James, first of all, just about the significance
of Russian tanks being taken out by rocket strikes, and we're told they've been forced out of 4 main villages to the north of the city of Kharkiv, a city which has continually been attacked. But we just need to look elsewhere, as you were saying. Kherson, the first major city and only major city to fall so far, we're told that the Russian occupiers are starting to phase out the Ukrainian hryvnia and bring in the Russian ruble. They're bringing in Russian internet suppliers, Russian...
In Kherson, people, officials and residents are saying we're not going to accept it. But right now, when Russian forces are in control, it's very difficult to see what people can do.
It's extremely difficult. 40% area, there were demonstrations, you're right, Lisa, early on. It was one of the defining images early on in this invasion, where a country that doesn't want to be taken demonstrates in the face of incoming tanks and armoured columns in front of their spreading further into the country. That said, we are seeing continued pledges of support from the West, long-term pledges of support, which is allowing Ukraine to hold its line. But it's clear on its own, even with this arrangement, Ukraine can't.
The head of U.S. National Intelligence, Avril Haines, speaking about that long war that the United States and indeed most Western countries believe that President Putin is now pursuing. She also mentioned that President Putin is hoping to exploit a sense of in both those countries are now, judging by the opinion polls, showing that they're actually considering that they believe it may be a good idea to join the NATO military alliance. Well, today, the Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, is visiting Sweden. He'll then...
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation.
Minister Boris Johnson pledging support to Sweden and Finland, and of course he and other Western leaders have made the trip by train here to Kyiv, visiting Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who has been trying. Ukrainian forces are making their last stand. Well, it is a development that is being watched closely, not just around the world, but of course in Ukraine itself. We here in Dnipro, we met a soldier who is.
There are almost no safe places. There's always a danger of a missile strike. There's always danger the situation can change and get worse.
Mariupol is gone. How does that make you feel?
fighting for every meter of the city and for every heart of the residents who are still there.
Серце кожного мешканця Маріуполя, який залишився там. Зараз Маріуполь, як
They have unfortunately fallen already.
у мене дружина.
I will talk now not as an official spokesman. My wife's parents are from Mariupol. Thank God we were able to evacuate them from the city. Now Ukraine is one big family. Every loss of every person and every child is felt deeply.
Відчути все це, це дуже складно це все відчувати.
Feeling all of that, setting us back 100 years.
100 років назад.
Nobody wants that.
Alexei Zarachenko speaking both personally and professionally about the situation.
Loss for the media community.
Oh, it shot like a bolt across the internet this morning, Yalda, and I noticed that many of our colleagues and friends, young Arab journalists in the BBC, were front line with her quiet authority but her commanding presence, looking straight down the barrel to the camera. And now her face is right across the internet. They've already put up a billboard in the city of Ramallah saying goodbye, that it was Israeli forces who killed her.
Our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette there. Well, as Lise was saying, veteran Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh from the broadcaster Al Jazeera has been shot dead while covering an Israeli army raid in
We chose a point that did not have any confrontations between the youth and the militants. We got to a point where we waited for Shireen to put on all her safety gear. She then reached us and we moved a few metres. We exposed ourselves to the army and the passers-by.
Colleague of Shireen, Mujahid al-Sadi there. Well, our Middle East correspondent Tim Franks is in Jerusalem. He says it's still not clear exactly what happened.
There certainly are extremely strong statements. I mean, the Palestinians are absolutely unequivocal about this. Indiscriminate firing from Palestinian militants, and it is possible, they say, that she was caught in crossfire. They've yet to offer firm evidence of that. They've offered a joint investigation, which has been turned down by the fact that she had US citizenship, and the American ambassador in Jerusalem has called for a full investigation.
Well, stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, who really discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun in Egypt?
Mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Our World, this weekend on BBC World News.
This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda. Stop anti-government protests. Our South Asia correspondent Regina Vaidyanathan said police and military are everywhere.
Well, outside the former Prime Minister's residence here in the centre of Colombo, a military presence here which is matched across the city of a curfew. Now, the Defence Ministry has now given security forces orders to shoot at sight at anyone who damages public property or threatens life. But many of the anti-government protesters, and that's when things escalated, and overnight there's been another night of violence in the city of Negombo, not too far from here in Colombo. There were clashes and shops and businesses and homes. The hotel resort belonging to the former Prime Minister's son was set alight. So things still remain quite tense as this curfew continues. In terms of the politics, well, protesters who are still gathering at the protest site at the other end, and the opposition parties as well, but we've heard from the opposition leader saying he's not going to take part in any all-party interim government unless Gotabaya Rajapaksa steps down. So the uncertainty continues here, and of course all the while
discovery, the 3,000-year-old tomb of Tutankhamun. This show at the University of Oxford is helping to move the narrative beyond the British excavator credited for the discovery, Howard Carter.
A message we want to get across to the visitors.
Daniela Rosenau, an Egyptologist, co-curated this show. She says that while Carter led the team of archaeologists, there were dozens of locals involved.
This is not the story of one heroic man. It took 10 years, many team members, and it makes it kind of clear that what we have here is obviously only one part of the story.
The tomb was discovered in 1922, just months after Egypt gained independence from Britain. It was found largely intact and caused a global media frenzy.
All the other layers of the ancient Egyptian history that has nothing to do with kings or queens or gold.
The curators of the show are offering a glimpse into this history, revealing a much fuller picture of a discovery that captured the imagination.
Easing in intensity, but still 90 km/h gusts with this across coastal areas of Andhra Pradesh. And it looks like the centre is just going to grind along the coastline of Andhra Pradesh, whilst the system weakens further into a depression by the time we get to Thursday. So the main threat is, meanwhile, the other big story across South Asia is, of course, the ongoing heat wave across Pakistan and northwest India. Temperatures on Thursday into parts of Sindh province could hit 50 degrees Celsius. We won't be that hot in Karachi. We'll be into the high 30s weekend as well. That's the latest.
Nature, all powerful.
दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और
किस्सा
कैसी हंसी मुस्कानों की धुन जिंदगी मक्खन
Aaron Heselhurst on Talking Business Weekly here on BBC World News.
Another Chinese container ship has just arrived here in Athens. China now owns most of this port. It's the fastest growing of its kind in Europe. But the East-West
security deal saying if either country came under attack, they would assist each other. The deal is to cover the period between Sweden's possible application to join NATO and its final accession. The broadcaster Al Jazeera has accused the Israeli military of deliberate. Scientists believe exposure to the nerve agent sarin explains why thousands of army veterans suffer from health conditions known as Gulf War syndrome. And they're all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
And inflation eases in the United States. Have we passed the peak of the cost of living crisis? Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tig Enright. Let's start by talking who's the head of European gas at Energy Aspects. Thanks very much for being with us today, James. I guess the question on many people's minds is, will this fuel further price increases for those of us here in Europe and the rest of the world?
It's actually not as much of Europe's gas suppliers as indicated. It's only one of two pipelines that feed through Ukraine towards Europe. And it's a smaller one of those pipelines, which is located in Luhansk. Volumes of liquefied natural gas on tankers being delivered into Europe in any case, which is helping to soften the market and preventing massive price rises.
I wonder, though, does it raise questions about how vulnerable other pipelines might be?
Much more gas through a route that transits Belarus and Poland. There was some concern a bit last year when Alexander Lukashenko was effectively saying they might cut off transit through Belarus, but
Russian gas today. What do you read into it?
It is very difficult to get rid of gas in the short term. There's a lot of opposition, mainly from Germany, from Italy, and parts of Central and Eastern Europe, which are very reliant on Russia.
For joining us today. Now, Consumer prices in the United States rose by 8.3% in April compared with the same month last year. That inflation figure still at historically high levels, but it is lower than the 8.5%.
A decline, but it is not as much as what economists were hoping or were anticipating. Additionally, we're also looking at numbers that are compared to previous highs. But remember, as you rightly pointed out, we're seeing that inflation is at
the minds of American consumers and, of course, voters. President Joe Biden saying yesterday he wants to bringing down consumer prices is his top domestic priority. Any indication as to what he might do to try to achieve that?
Concrete steps. Look, the things that can be done are being done in terms of what the Federal Reserve can do by increasing interest rates to try and bring down the CPI. Other things that can be done, we see that Joe Biden is going to be small incremental changes, whether you're going to see a change by November election time. It's a bit of a tall order.
Sure is. Samir Hussain in New York, thank you very much for that. Now, Toyota is suspending operations at more of its factories.
Supply chain disruption that's been caused by those lockdowns in China. And just like earlier in the pandemic, automakers, like you said, are among those being hit the hardest. Toyota earlier announced a revised production high. The news agency is citing an internal memo that says the factory is having problems securing parts. And if you remember, this comes only weeks after operations were resumed there.
Joao da Silva reporting there. In other business today, in China, inflation figures for April show a 2.1% rise from a year earlier. It is higher than the March figure of 1.5%. Nothing close, though, to the surging price rises being experienced in much. The US president as morally wrong and flat out stupid. And the Apple iPod is being discontinued. First launched in 2001, the MP3 player was a major part of the revival of the technology brand and laid the ground. The cost of borrowing could go up as soon as July. That's it from me. See you next time.
कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम.
Extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. बरसों से सरसों.
ये मेरा चीज है.
Get live ball-by-ball cricket coverage on the BBC Sport website and app across all forms of the game. For live coverage and the latest stats and scorecards, go online or download the app now.
Hello there, I'm Ollie Foster. This is Sport Today. We're live at the BBC Sports Centre. Here's what's coming up for you. It's Derby Italia in the Coppa Italia. We're going to hear from our reporter in Rome ahead of a known as the Derby d'Italia. The BBC's John Bennett is there for us. Spoke to us about how this final could be a very fitting farewell for a Juve legend.
Yes, an emotional occasion for Giorgio Chiellini, one of the iconic figures with Juventus. He's already won 22 pieces of silverware with the club. But to sum up his character, in the pre-match press conference yesterday, he refused to talk about his future because he didn't want to divert any attention away. Coppa d'Italia final, because it's only the third time they've met in this showpiece event in Italian football. The last time was way back in 1965. And both teams have had difficult seasons. Yes, Inter won the Super Cup against Juventus, but it looks as though
the managers likened their run-in against Liverpool to a game of tennis.
The most difficult service in tennis is the service you have to serve to be champion. So it's quite similar to that position. We need 6-7 points.
A 52nd league crown. They're 6 points ahead of Rangers with a vastly superior goal difference, so they could actually afford to lose if Rangers drop points against Ross County.
there wasn't a great deal of expectation.
Will say players who take part at Centurion Golf Club would be in violation of their regulations. The American Phil Mickelson, England's Lee Westwood, they've requested a release from the PGA Tour to take part. Chief Executive of LIV Golf Investments, Greg Norman, was...
You have to play the PGA Tour. That's it. Pure and simple as that. So all we're trying to do is give the players another opportunity to go play. Obviously, them partnering up with the European Tour sends a bit of a signal that they're trying to tighten up their monopoly situation.
I think we're capable of it if we get some stops, and then, you know, if shots fall, so what? But it's a hard place to play. I've played there before, being in the Sixers jersey. I know how that crowd...
Prior to his team's win over the Mavericks, Phoenix Suns point guard Chris Paul wore a shirt featuring a picture of the seven-time WNBA All-Star Brittany Griner. The Phoenix Mercury star has been detained in Russia since February. That's after authorities...
I mean, we all support her, just want to try to get her home as soon as possible. You know what I mean? So it was all in support of BG. We miss seeing her at the practice facility day in and day out. So just trying to get her.
Sunday had an easier time of it in the second to set up a third-round match against either Alex de Minaur or Tommy Paul. The former New Zealand captain Brendan McCullum is one of the contenders to be England's next Test coach. McCullum and the rest of the team, goodbye.
China, this weather front's pretty persistent and bringing further heavy downpours over the next few days. Remnants of Cyclone Asani bringing heavy showers and thunderstorms to the southeast of India. It stays very hot with heat wave across the northwest and into Pakistan. Dry and sunny across the European continent, just the chance of a few isolated thunderstorms mainly over the higher ground. 25 degrees lightly in Rio de Janeiro with a good deal of sunshine around on Thursday, and it's looking unsettled across the Pacific Northwest. Another
to the grand side of thrill.
What does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
Some headphones for spatial audio and a vibrating vest to feel the beat.
Some of my friends, they listen to pirate radios.
I don't know whether I'm expected to try and retune the radio. Yes, I was slightly ahead of the game.
And 3D environments, and we try and seamlessly sort of take you through movement within the scene to different parts of the experience.
I'm on top of the record. And that happens from the very start when you imagine that you're
at once, including the police. And this is what's going on in the station.
Something over here. This is Tim, a policeman in the Acid House squad.
The responsibility of the squad was to gather intelligence, was to disrupt
boxes. I'm naturally feeling I need to walk towards this phone.
Hello, this is Amnesia House. Tonight's massive party will be taking place as scheduled.
The Rose and Crown pub for 10:30. That's the first meeting point. And there's the music. I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Backpack is called a sub-pack, and you wear it, and basically certain frequencies in the soundtrack respond to that, so it gives you a deep sort of kind of...
Is that how I'm meant to feel? Wow, I was totally and utterly immersed in another world there. But it was fascinating to see what an emotive and important time this was for the people who were part of it.
We have the ability to walk around. That's 6 degrees of freedom. We have interactions. We have haptics, so we have wind blowing in your face. As the user, you don't know it's happening, you just feel it.
You know what to do.
Also in the programme, a prominent Palestinian-American journalist is shot dead while covering an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank. Shireen Abu Akleh worked for Al Jazeera. They say she was shot by the Israeli military. Israel suggests Welcome back to the programme. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is preparing for
out of some villages, but this war is stagnating, and Ukraine's leader knows it.
I also want to urge all our people, and especially those not on the front line, not to get carried away.
The whole of the eastern Donbass region. Today, though, a warning. A shift in focus, yes, but not a shrinking of ambition.
The next month or two of fighting will be significant as the Russians attempt to reinvigorate their efforts, but even if they are in Ukraine, during which he still intends to achieve goals beyond the Donbass.
Vladimir Putin is relying on Western governments and the European Union on losing interest, on having to focus on other issues so that he can capitalise in the to be helped out, while the others refuse to surrender. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Well, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is visiting Sweden and Finland to discuss the war in Ukraine as both nations.
I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Anderson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration. It's an agreement that brings our two countries even closer together. It will allow us
that we've signed a security pact, a security agreement. What kind of assurances can he give a nation like Sweden in the event of any kind of Russian aggression?
What this seems to be is a pre-agreement before Sweden air cooperation and cooperation on the ground, which wouldn't be surprised in the next few weeks to see British troops going over to Sweden, perhaps for a small exercise, as we've had recently in Finland.
You know, when we look at this and these security pacts and these, what the Chinese have said, what the Indians have said is poking the bear. It's almost trying to, sort of aggravate Russia.
Well, Yelda, I suppose if that analogy, you may well now consider that neutrality is not your best option. This is not poking the bear. This is a legitimate defensive move by countries that quite understandably feel now threatened, as they didn't, by the way, a year ago when the majorities in both a history of submarine problems with the Russians, who have a habit of spying on their bases with submarines, even when they were neutral. So there's a long, long history, going back actually centuries of rivalry in that Baltic region. And let's not forget, of course, that the Baltic states themselves formerly part of.
And what are the complaints that in interviewing Ukrainian MPs and various other leaders, they've said to me that one of the things that they found incredibly frustrating about the West, about NATO, is that NATO
an offensive alliance. Its charter is essentially defensive and has been since the start in 1949. I can understand Russians saying that. From the Russian perspective, realists in my field might say that NATO's in the entirely legitimate concerns of independent sovereign countries. And what we've seen in Europe for the first time now in many decades is a sovereign country being brutalised, invaded, and having its citizens murdered and its cities bombed. I look back, and I think concerning the no-fly, I would think that most senior leaders in NATO, senior military leaders, will look back and say they made the right decision, the right call on that. However, we'll see how this plays out going forward. And we've heard this to allow it to perform very much more efficiently than anybody would have expected. That's as far as we're going to go, and that's probably as far as we should go at the moment, although it's vital to keep those supplies up to allow Ukraine to conduct those counterattacks to retake its sovereign territory.
Frank, the raid took place on the Jenin refugee camp. Her employer, Al Jazeera, said she was shot in the face by Israeli soldiers and was wearing a flak jacket marked press. Israel denies targeting journalists and says the Palestinians have rejected their offer of a joint investigation.
In seconds, there was the first shot. I told them that we are being targeted, we are being shot at. I turned and found Shireen on the ground. I found Shatha shielding herself by a tree and screaming. I turned and found Shireen on the ground in the first few...
Still not clear exactly what happened.
There certainly are extremely strong statements. I mean, the Palestinians are absolutely unequivocal about this. Al Jazeera itself has said that she was shot by Israeli soldiers. They've firm evidence of that. They've offered a joint investigation, which has been turned down by the Palestinians. And I understand that Palestinian doctors are currently carrying out an autopsy on Shireen's body in the Palestinian city of...
Reporting there from Jerusalem. Let's just take you live now to Ramallah, where hundreds of people have gathered, and we understand that Shireen's body has arrived in the area. The veteran Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, as they welcome or commemorate the death of Shireen al-Akleh, and her body has arrived there. The US has urged a transparent investigation into her killing in the... The winner of the presidential election in the Philippines has made a symbolic visit to the grave of his father, the country's former dictator who was forced from power in disgrace. After declaring victory in the election, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. asked
B-mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
US intelligence has warned that Vladimir Putin is preparing for a long war in Ukraine, with even victory in the east potentially not ending the conflict. The Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, warned the next months could see a more unpredictable and...
They will detain or even kill Ukraine's leaders. And I think we were all surprised when that didn't come about, given that Russia had mobilized about 60% of its available ground forces, had overwhelming air superiority. That is guaranteed. That he is not guaranteed of succeeding in the Donbass or establishing the land bridge to Crimea, yet at the same time, he won't admit defeat.
No, and I suppose just military...
Including this morning's latest report, its European intelligence services, even United Nations officials are assessing that we're in a period where we're looking at months going on, but within those months, let me put it in a nutshell. Vlad is not cracking. That window will probably close within weeks. And then in this prolonged conflict, it's not a question of whether Russia wins. It is a question of when Putin will admit he cannot succeed and get back to the negotiating table.
Nathan said police and military are everywhere.
Well, outside the former Prime Minister's residence here in the centre of Colombo, a military presence here which is matched across the city as Colombo and the rest of this island nation. You can see what's normally a really busy and packed road completely deserted as this country goes through another day of a curfew. Now, the Defence Ministry has now given security forces orders in the city of Negombo, not too far from here in Colombo. There were clashes and shops and businesses and homes were torched. And we're also seeing more politicians' residences and properties targeted as well. It's been last night, a hotel resort belonging to the former Prime Minister's son was set alight. So things still remain quite tense as this curfew continues. In terms of the politics, well, protesters who are still gathering at the protest government, unless Gotabaya Rajapaksa steps down. So the uncertainty continues here, and of course all the while people continue to struggle through this economic crisis.
It's Regini Vaidianathan reporting there now. Brazil's controversial...
Pastor Raquel Prado,
Nearly 70% of evangelical Christians like her voted for the controversial President Jair Bolsonaro in 2018. The largest grouping within this movement in Brazil is women of colour. Once told a congresswoman he wouldn't rape her because she wasn't worth it. But he also connected religion and what he would deliver.
Brasil acima de tudo, Deus acima de todos.
Mobiliza necessariamente público estritamente religioso. Ele mobiliza uma população pedindo respostas a essas crises.
But things are changing. Women like 20-year-old Tachi are part of an evangelical movement against Bolsonaro.
Principalmente para reger país, para ser presidente de país, por ser desrespeitoso, por ser homem machista e até mesmo sexista e misógino, e assim vai, a lista é enorme.
Locality, clearing the way for him to run once more. The political stage looks set for a showdown between Bolsonaro and Lula come October's election. While it's too early to know who'll win, experts say that these are the voices that will...
Cyclonic storm over the last 24 hours, so the winds are easing in intensity, but still 90 kilometres an hour gusts with this across coastal areas of Andhra Pradesh. And it looks like the centre is just going to grind along the coastline of Andhra Pradesh whilst the system weakens further into a depression. We'll be into the high 30s here, I think, as we go through Thursday afternoon. There's that heavy rain from Asani affecting, as I say, Andhra Pradesh. But further north, the air's pretty humid, so there will be plenty of thunderstorm activity in Bangladesh and northeastern areas of India. Those storms could have some hail.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has...
This is a residential building. There's the real sense that the danger, the conflict is coming closer, and a feeling here now that nowhere is safe.
Join me, Lise Doucette, and our teams across Ukraine for continuing coverage on BBC World News.
5 years after being battered by Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still fighting to...
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines. Britain and Sweden have signed a security deal saying if either country came under attack, they would assist each other. The deal is to cover the period between Sweden's possible application to join NATO and its final accession. The broadcaster Al Jazeera has accused the Israeli military of deliberately targeting journalists after one of its best-known correspondents.
Hard Talk asks tough questions in interviews with people who are shaping the news.
Welcome to Hard Talk from Washington. I'm Stephen Sacker. When Vladimir Putin made that America needed. Is there an attitude in this city, Washington, D.C., that you politicians are now prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure Ukraine's victory in the war with Vladimir Putin?
Well, my sense, Stephen, is that was due to the fact that the American intelligence community, along with the British intelligence community, has been very forward-leaning up to the beginning of the conflict about Vladimir Putin's intentions, and made the chairman of the intelligence committee sitting down with the head of the German spy services, and they still didn't believe that Putin was going to come in at this level. So I think there is this unity of purpose that we, America and the West, will take on.
You know, you've given new weaponry to NATO allies in Eastern Europe so they can release some of their equipment to the Ukrainians. Are you going to go further? Could you envisage in the next few months, maybe even years, giving US...
becoming a more and more blurred line.
Another question, which is about how far America goes, is about personnel, boots on the ground. We know American service personnel are training Ukrainians in countries neighboring Ukraine. Are there US personnel?
Not just to leave, but going actually back to Kyiv, which I think is terribly important. Again, we've done this. One of the things that I think is so important is that we've done this in concert with our NATO allies. And if there had not been that kind of Union forces, but without that total Western support, and that again is something, there are many things the Biden administration may have not got right, particularly in Afghanistan, but in terms of rebuilding the coalition and keeping that coalition united, the fact that the Germans took the lead.
Russian generals have been targeted by the Ukrainians thanks to US intelligence. We believe that the Moskva, the Black Sea flagship Russian vessel, was sunk thanks to US intelligence cooperation with the Ukrainians. This is
and again, intel, whether it's British intel or American intel, by nature, those folks in that community don't like to share information. So one of the things that was remarkable was early on, Putin expected not only the military,
the arming of Ukraine, the feeling that we will do whatever it takes. It feeds into a Russian narrative, a narrative that Vladimir Putin has just repeated on his Victory Day speech, when he basically says, we in Russia...
Ukraine versus Russia. I think most of us in the West over the last few years, particularly here in this country, have felt, whether it's with COVID, some of the political dysfunction in this country, can liberal democracy be successful against authoritarian regimes like Russia or China?
And what it looks like to Russia, but also to some observers outside Russia, is that here in Washington there is now an intent to effectively neutralize Russia and destroy Vladimir Putin, weakened to the degree that it cannot do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine ever again. That's a message to Russia that Putin has no future. Biden, in an unscripted moment, talked about the fact that he...
A bit more care. But I look at, I believe, Liz Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary, calling out as well the war crimes that Putin has committed. We see German leaders, French leaders. The truth is, potentially in the world of diplomacy, own Russian leadership, him at one end of the table versus the other end, it speaks 1,000 words. Where this allows Putin an exit ramp, that's a valid question to ask.
It's a very important question.
But not being willing to call out the atrocities for what they are, I think would be a grave blind-eyed to the type of atrocities that we in the West have said we will stand firmly against. Where this leads, I think that is absolutely the right question to pose me. And to
much on this invasion, he is committed to doubling down. The question is what doubling down means, and whether you in the United States have prepared the American public properly for the degree to which there is now perhaps...
Stand with democratic elected nations. Our failure to do so, and if we'd allowed this aggression to go unchecked, we all know Putin would not have stopped with Ukraine.
You not only sit there as chair of the intelligence...
called SolarWinds, where Russia, GRU, got into 18,000 companies. Luckily, they only used it to take out information rather than shutting down those companies. But as we saw in the NotPetya attack, where Russia launched against Ukraine in 2017, and that rebounded to date. And I think we should assume that at some point there will be a more massive Russian cyber effort, whether it's directed against Ukraine, whether it's directed against Eastern Europe, whether it's directed against the UK or America. But I think we have to have caused NATO troops to die or Polish hospitals to shut down. That is an area that has not ever been tested yet.
A wider geopolitical thought. Some of your opponents here in the US Senate, and I'm thinking of people like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, sort of green light to invade Taiwan. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I would take issue with your notion that they are my political opponents. Matter of fact, Senator Rubio is my vice chair on my intelligence committee. I work regularly with Senator Graham on this issue, but I think we do stand united. On the question of China, China is the true economic challenge, technology challenge, and long-term military challenge.
You would call China an adversary?
I would call Chinese advancement in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and a whole series of areas. And one of the things that we're launching right now is this alliance of democracies so that we can try on a technology competition basis to maintain both innovation.
Whether America has the strength, the internal coherence right now to meet these challenges. I look at a United States, I see deep political polarization, I see a country not well equipped.
Was asking, over the last few years, we've seen liberal democracies, whether it be in America or in Europe or elsewhere, in many ways have some level of disarray. We've seen disinformation tools. But what I think has showed us in
and spend measures is stuck, not least because people in your own party, in the Senate, your own colleagues, Manchin, Sinema, they won't vote for it. And the public is thinking, where's the leadership here?
I guess, were there aspirations that were beyond?
Think about Biden and time. He's running out of time. The midterms are coming up in November. Look at the polls. His approval rating is down at 40%. The Democrats are going to lose the House, according to all the polls, probably going to lose the Senate decisively.
Within the Democratic Party, there's always been divides between those of us who are on the more moderate or pro-business side and those who are on the extreme progressive end.
Bernie Sanders, talking of progressives, he says the Democrats still have to decide whether they want to. Do you want to be part of a party which fights the Republicans on the grounds of culture and social issues? And I'm thinking primarily today here in the United States about the extraordinarily heated debate.
And I don't think Americans
is this
want
the
to go
territory
back.
on which the Democrats are going to run and fight the midterm elections of 2022? You want to take the Republicans on in a culture war?
One of the things that about at least politics in this country is it's hard to
I understand.
and that's what it's taken.
But what I'm trying to get to is the words of House Democrat Sean Patrick Maloney, who said just the other day, abortion is going to be, quote, the central choice in the 2022 election. You referred earlier to the possibility, you implied, that he will be running again for a second term. You know better than I that if he runs again for a second term, he'll be 82. 82.
Stage were there overly ambitious plans in a first year, but the fact that we have managed to take on COVID, that we do have job growth at record levels, and that we finally put on the board a massive infrastructure plan. I think if we
Welcome to the grand side of Grill.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing.
Severe downpours and thunderstorms expected Wednesday could have some very large hail and some tornadoes in those. Many parts of the United States having warm weather for the time of year. Now, for the north of Brazil, we continue to see scattered showers and thunderstorms, some heavier rain into the north across western areas of Spain. A few showers will continue to affect parts of Libya, fairly gusty winds here, and it's quite cool as well for the time of year. Temperatures just 20 degrees Celsius in Tripoli. We continue to see Shamal winds blowing into the southern front has brought some torrential rain. The last 24 hours we've seen over 200 millimetres of rain across parts of Guangdong. The front will continue to bring heavy downpours across the south of China. Probably most areas getting around 50 to 100 millimetres. So again, we could see some further flooding issues here. And we've seen...
So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts. And that's where experience counts. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's...
out of villages near Kharkiv. And on this program, I'll be speaking to the former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. He was in charge here when Russian forces first invaded in 2014.
Government report says sea levels reached their highest on record in 2021. It blames rising water temperatures and glaciers melting. It's launched counterattacks in the east of the country near Kharkiv. One other important line to bring you, Ukraine has turned off a key gas pipeline, cutting off a third of supplies from Russia to Europe. So let's straight go to Dnipro and our chief
Russian forces is now coming under increasing political control of Moscow. Some of our viewers may remember that very early on in this invasion, as Ukrainian forces were forced out of Kherson, the people took to the streets waving Ukraine.
This T-90 tank, Russia's most advanced, destroyed. Ukrainian counterattacks have forced the invaders out of some villages, but this war is stagnating, and Ukraine's leader knows it. According to the US, instead launching shoot and scoot missions from inside their country. Vladimir Putin's latest aim is to take the whole of the eastern Donbass region. Today, though, a warning. A shift in focus, yes, but not a war in the east before this invasion even happened. This war is still brutal. Look at Mariupol. Hundreds of Ukrainian fighters trapped in tunnels under the Azovstal steel plant in a destroyed city.
Well, the war in Ukraine is certainly being watched closely in capitals around the world, most of all in neighbouring states, with NATO members paying close attention. Today, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been threats of it possibly spilling over the borders. Publics in both countries have indicated a new interest in becoming full members of the NATO military alliance. Well, let's get another perspective on this war. You were the president when Russian forces moved into Crimea, when Russian-backed separatists took over large parts of the Donbass. What do you think now? How far does President Putin want to go?
Donbass, including Mariupol, including Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. All these things were under Ukrainian control within first 4 months of the war because of the heroism of Ukraine, exactly the same like he do with the Crimea, or now he attempt to do with the Kherson, to push pressure to that Ukraine start to be the part of the Soviet Union second edition, or the Russian, not only in Kharkiv, where we have released 9 villages. This happening also in Kherson region, where I returned back only a couple of days ago, where our battalion is fighting on the border between
resistance, but it is losing ground. It's on the brink of losing Mariupol. It's losing in the east of Ukraine. What is your assessment of Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president? He almost put you in prison in January.
Stability and unity in Ukraine, and we ruined this Putin expectation, because on the 24th of February, when the war launched, we are shoulder to shoulder, all Ukrainians, and we united not around the world, together where the Ukrainian armed forces surprised the world on their 12th already weeks of fighting against Russia.
Do you think Europe is doing it too, and President Macron is saying it could still take decades? Are they doing enough?
First of all, we are very much appreciate the European Union, to the United States for their global leadership. 2 months ago, I called to the Western leaders, please, we need to make 5 steps of support of Ukraine. Point number 1, this is the land lease. I very much appreciate the decision of the United States land lease. We have point number 2, this is the Marshall Plan. And Marshall Plan is the donor conference when we should be enough. Now we have $40 billion, which vote just yesterday from the United States. Can you imagine that if the future of the world is depending from 1,000 anti-personnel carrier, 500 tanks, 100 jet fighter, and 300 anti-aircraft missiles? Point number 4, we need sanction which should be adopted by European Union. And some of the European nations said that they are reluctant to do that. Please, this is the symbol of the Putin political corruption. We should keep unity. And point number 5,
Very much echoes what we hear day in, day out, gratitude from the people of Ukraine, but saying that in the midst of this destructive war, they still need more support. Petro Poroshenko, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us here on BBC. It's already been introduced. What is the mood in that city? We're going to go to Odessa on the Black Sea coast to join Larissa Curtin, who's originally from Kherson, still has family there. Larissa, what are you hearing from people in Kherson?
The situation there is really awful. It's totally under control of Russian occupants, Russian troops. And today I characterize the situation in Kherson like silent terror, I don't know how to, on Russian propaganda. And the citizens of Kherson, some of them have influenced from this propaganda, and they started to believe that Ukrainian authority forgot about them strictly, and they are torture some residentials, and they're killing, they're raping, unfortunately, they are destroying villages at all. And furthermore, these days, food and medicine. And
so Clarissa, Larissa, can people, you say they're making lists of residents, can people leave?
The Russian soldiers closed the entry to the city, and the people are closed in the region, unfortunately. They can't go out. And they said that the most...
In reporting where Russia is now making moves to try to bring it more under Moscow's political orbit. So that's how it looks now on day 77 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some advances by Ukrainian forces in the Donbass. We'll keep providing you all the updates from here, but back to you in London.
Lise, thanks very much. Lise Doucette there in Dnipro. Now, the Middle East broadcaster Al Jazeera has accused the Israeli military of deliberately targeting journalists. The camera then continues around the corner of the road where she can be seen lying in the streets, and those images are too graphic to actually broadcast. Another journalist who was there, though, had this account about what happened.
What I found Shatha shielding herself by a tree and screaming. I turned and found Shireen on the ground in the first few seconds with the shooting, and we were telling each other we were being shot at. The shooting continued for more than 3 minutes on the teams.
Then today, what Al Jazeera is saying, what Israel's Prime Minister is saying.
Well, Matthew, I'm speaking to you from East Jerusalem, just around the corner from Shireen's house, where people have been gathered since early this morning, inspired this morning. And what we know is that Shireen was doing what she did for decades, and that was cover trouble in the occupied territories. There was an Israeli military raid in Jenin in the north of the West Bank, where witnesses, and indeed by the Palestinian authorities and by Al Jazeera, who say there was no fire. This was all on the Israeli military. And indeed, Al Jazeera, Shireen's employer, described it.
The 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, that's seen as a vital tipping point. Well, new analysis from China shows the country's sea levels have reached their highest level on record. Well, the government report says rising water temperatures and the melting of glaciers are that means it's risen by an average of 3.4 millimetres a year since 1980, higher than the global rate over the same period. Well, let's speak to Dr. Ella Gilbert, a climate scientist based at the British Antarctic Survey. Doctor, thank you so much.
Carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, which cause temperatures to rise. That has two main effects. So one is that it causes the ocean to expand because it starts taking up more space as it gets warmer. So that's thermal expansion. That's about regional variations, and that's partly because sea level rise isn't completely uniform all over the world. Some areas of the world are slowly, slightly sinking, and that includes regions like the east coast of China, whereas others are.
Pause for a bridge being swept away. Those pictures only a couple of days ago, and they're on our screens now. But in terms of what we're seeing in China, what do you foresee as the likely impact of sea levels rising in terms of the amount they are?
In China, there are a lot of people living in those very populated areas on that coastline. So this means a real terms impact for people's lives and people's livelihoods. They're going to have to adapt to this changing sea level. There's going to be a lot more investment.
In Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, in the next few minutes, the central bank is warning the economy could collapse within 2 days unless there's a change in government. That's here and that's next.
Hello there. Over recent days, 50 degrees Celsius. We won't be that hot in Karachi. We'll be into the high 30s here, I think, as we go through Thursday afternoon. There's that heavy rain from Asani affecting, as I say, Andhra Pradesh. But further north, the air's pretty humid, so there will be plenty of thunderstorm activity in Bangladesh.
देश के हर पल कभी परछा का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं नए रंग में ढला ये मेरा चीज है
Research for stolen statues that are believed to have living souls. Our World, Cambodia, Returning the Gods on BBC World News.
Taken by Russian forces early in this war are being told to use the ruble as the currency. TV and internet is now coming from Moscow. Ukraine turns off a key gas pipeline, cutting off a third of supplies from Russia to Europe. We assess the impact. The adults live with the condition. Welcome back to Enforce and open fire on anyone involved in violent incidents, including looting. Protesters are demanding the resignation of the country's president. Let's go live now to Colombo and our South Asia regional editor, Amber Hassan Ethrajan. And Amber Hassan,
where he's also expected to talk about what are the chances of forming an interim government. And after Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned from the Prime Minister post on Monday, there is no government, there is a political vacuum, and this is causing a lot of uncertainties. And that is what the central bank governor was saying. If we don't get political stability, the situation is going to get worse, which means the country could witness more shortage of fuel and food because they don't have enough foreign exchange reserves. They need political stability to...
Because there's a national curfew. There's also that shoot-on-sight order for looters and for violence. Are people still coming out onto the streets to protest?
Hundreds of people at the protest site, but there is also a lot of tension in the air what the government might do next, because there is already, emergency was declared, and then a curfew till tomorrow morning, and soldiers on the streets, and shoot-on-sight orders, not doing anything good for the people or for the economy.
Amber Hassan, we'll come back to you once we've had that national address from the President. Thanks very much, though, for now. Let's continue, though, to discuss what is happening in Sri Lanka. Let's talk to Dr. Ram Manikalingam.
The people themselves are asking them to go.
Why do you think it has got so bad?
I think the main factor here is the economic factor. The government's incompetence and arrogance, might I say, in handling the economy has aggravated...
Find a way to manage to stay in office?
Well, currently, I believe that the protests will continue until the president resigns. Today, there is a standoff between the president on the one hand and the leader of the opposition on the other about who should lead.
They actually mean from where they are now?
Well, a total collapse would mean that we would run out of medicines, we would run out of rice, dal, basic necessities, and we would run out of food and fuel. So it would make it very, very difficult. A government that consists of all parties in parliament to deal immediately, first with the economic crisis, and then with the change in constitution that will eliminate the powers of the president, and finally hold an election in 6 months to 1 year.
You were there in Colombo only, I think it was last week. What are people telling you about just how hard it is to get from day to day?
It is very difficult to get from day to day. And we need an infusion of assistance from overseas, but no government indicate a timeline in which he will relinquish his powers, and then that will enable the international community, in particular friends of Sri Lanka, to come in and give a rapid infusion of capital that will allow us to deal with the immediate.
Now, it is business time, and as we were saying in the headlines, Ukraine has turned off a key gas pipeline, cutting off a third of supplies from Russia to Europe. Tiger's here with more on that. And I suppose the basic question is, what impact has that already had?
Yeah, the area through which the pipeline or this key transit point is located has fallen under Russian control, and it can no longer guarantee its safety. Now, it has promised to find an alternative way of getting these gas supplies.
Broadly brushed off this initial concern about transit via Ukraine being disrupted. It's actually not as much of Europe's gas suppliers as indicated. It's only one of two pipelines that feed through you, helping to soften the market and preventing massive price rises.
I wonder, though, does it raise questions about how vulnerable other pipelines might be to action like this, even if Europe itself is unwilling to cut itself off from Russian gas and Russia wants...
But that was met with fierce opposition from the Russian side. And then Russia has its own pipeline going into the Baltic, Nord Stream 1. So it would, again, be Russia's decision to cut off the supply. So there aren't that many points of fallibility between from Italy and parts of Central and Eastern Europe, which are very reliant on Russian gas. So this is something that will be a phased transition over some time. It's quicker and more feasible to get rid of other Russian commodities such as
Well, look, I mean, it did go down marginally. The cost of living did go down marginally compared to the previous month. That said, we're still looking at levels that are at a 4-decade high. It means that the American incentivizes the American consumer to spend. And so I think a lot of economists are now starting to worry about a possible recession.
Yes, indeed. And Joe Biden saying yesterday that bringing
especially given that this is an election year, a midterm election, and the Republicans are really putting the blame of inflation right at the steps of the White House and at the feet of President Joe Biden. In terms of what can actually be done.
With that, I'll hand it back to you now, Matthew.
Tig, thanks very much. Thank you. Now, do stay with us, because still to come here on today's Global, we meet two women living with chronic pain, a condition affecting 1 in 4 people in the UK. Is the condition being taken seriously?
LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious.
% of adults in the UK live with long-term persistent pain. Nearly half of those said it impacted their daily life, simple things like doing the shopping or going to work. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has been to meet two young women whose life...
videos. Today, she's living a life dominated by pain.
Opioid patches, anti-inflammatories, nerve pain medications.
It started with back pain.
It was how I would imagine the pain. It doesn't matter how hard I try or how much I wish or how much I pray, it isn't, or most likely isn't going to change.
Hi Estella, come in.
At a clinic in...
Either as a society or as a healthcare system, to deal with that pain is just, you probably know yourself, pain is huge.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Libby is one of those who's worked with Chris. Now at university, she's lived almost... Both Libby and Jen have at times felt badly let down by the health service, late or missed diagnoses, or simply not having their voices heard. Both have also found people who understand their condition and treat them with care and compassion.
The president of Pain Alliance Europe, Deirdre, welcome here to the programme. An absolutely fascinating report there from Dominic and that survey. Do you think this is something that broadly has been going under the radar in terms of public perception?
both in...
And those accounts we just heard, are those the sorts of accounts you hear on a daily basis?
Absolutely. I'm a pain patient first myself before president, and that is the lived experience of pain. That, first of all, it can be really the huge impact that it has on people's daily lives.
Yes, exactly the sorts of accounts we were listening to. I thought a telling statistic in this survey was that a quarter of those affected are on opioids, with all the dangers of dependency and no real evidence that it's an
effective treatment that would help them manage their pain best. But what the report does also show is that there are very little other supports apart from these interventions. So things like self-management and really...
It also says in this report that medical practices are lagging behind actually understanding how the brain deals with pain. Is that the area perhaps that health services need to focus more on?
Absolutely. It go to pinpoint. So really the understanding all the way from the labs all the way through to bedside. Really we need a curious mind looking at this.
Deirdre Ryan, it is a really important subject to highlight. Thank you for joining us. Short break. We'll have the latest on all the main lines out of Ukraine and Sri Lanka, that presidential address that is currently going on. See you in a moment or two.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके
आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ.
On the Belarusian side, migrants started throwing rocks and bricks and branches towards the Polish.
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chains. But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up and we have to...
I understand the consequences of my decision. And one of the consequences of my decision was not going to Australia, and I was prepared not to go.
Ukraine turns off a key gas pipeline, cutting off a third of supplies from Russia to Europe.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Dnipro in central eastern Ukraine.
Addressing the nation. And one of Al Jazeera's best-known reporters, Shireen Abu Akleh, has been shot dead in the occupied West Bank. The broadcaster says she was deliberately targeted by Israeli armed forces. It into Russia, according to those now in charge there. Kherson was captured early on in this war. People in the city are being told they have to use the Russian ruble as their currency. TV and internet is also now coming from Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukraine to Dnipro and to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Lise.
Yes, and welcome to Dnipro. We're in central eastern Ukraine in what is a logistics and humanitarian hub as this war under Russian control. And important military developments around the second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv. During the day, we were reporting that Ukrainian forces launched a counteroffensive, pushing Russian forces out towards the Russian border.
I also want to urge all our people, and especially those not on the front line, not to get carried away. We should not put moral pressure and expect some victories weekly and even daily.
Over Ukraine, according to the US, instead launching shoot and scoot missions from inside their country. Vladimir Putin's latest aim is to take the whole of the eastern Donbass region. Today, though, a warning. A shift in focus, yes, on Western governments and the European Union on losing interest, on having to focus on other issues so that he can capitalise in this war. And he's not against a long-term campaign. Let's remember that there were 8 years of Russian.
But for Ukrainians right across this country, no matter what they did before February the 25th, the 24th, in the early hours of the morning of Russia's invasion, their lives have been upended. And yet, literally, Ken, do you find there's still a great interest in Eurovision, even with this war now strangling the country?
Yes, of course, we need this right now. All Ukrainians need normal, peaceful life. It is very important for them. You know, after yesterday's semifinal, I received thousands of messages, of letters from Ukrainians all over Europe. They thanked us that we normal May.
And I understand that your song for the competition is a traditional song, but a very modern interpretation of it, with many different musical genres.
Additional instruments, musical instruments from the past, and of course they mix it with modern Ukrainian R&B and rap style music. It's very interesting.
So it's about mother and motherland. Of course, take your hat off. Do you think it will face stiff competition in the final?
Oh, once again, please.
Well,
on Saturday, the main event, because we really want to win the competition this year, because it will be very symbolical to Ukraine. You know, like the first victory before the main victory. Lost their jobs. It's terrible, of course. And for example, my family, my wife with my two small children, they have to flee the war. Now they're in Germany. We haven't seen each other since now.
Well, we wish Ukraine the best of luck, but of course we wish all of the competitors the best of luck in the Eurovision final. But thank you very much for joining us, Timur Miroshenko, to talk to us about what you'll be often emphasizes this. And the city which has become a byword for suffering is that of Mariupol, a strategic port city on the Sea of Azov. Almost all of it is now flattened and in Russian hands. And the last stand is being taken, a senior figure from the Territorial Defense Forces here in Dnipro, Oleksiy Zarochenko. We asked him as a soldier for his views on what was happening in Mariupol and beyond.
Now Mariupol, thank God we were able to evacuate them from the city before the situation became so dire. But my daughter was born there. Feeling all of that is very difficult, but unfortunately, this is the time of such raw emotions, and at the same time, we have no time for it. We've seen what Russia does to the lands it has already invaded, setting us back 100 years. Nobody wants that.
Oleksiy Zarochenko, Tal Haynes, speaking to a Senate committee hearing that she believed that President Putin wanted to fight a long war. Well, today it's the turn of the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, who's been also speaking to a Senate hearing, and he said he didn't believe that President refused repeatedly President Zelensky's offer, in his words, to close the sky, a way to a no-fly zone to stop Russia's advantage when it comes to the skies. Well, we'll continue to follow all the developments here from Dnipro.
2 minutes, President Rajapaksa condemning the violence between pro and anti-government protesters on Monday that injured nearly 300 people. He said that he would attempt to appoint a new cabinet within a week, including a daily 12-hour power cuts. And all of this, of course, after all of those clashes, the most violent on Monday. But very interesting in terms of what we've heard from the president's address, because the critical bit is 48 hours. They will continue their protests until the president, like his brother, the Prime Minister, steps down. So this crisis is likely to get worse in the coming days if that remains the position from the President. But those...
most spacious.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Our main headlines here. Pro-Kremlin officials now controlling Kherson announced plans to break away from Ukraine and join Russia. It fell to Russia less than a week into this war. And Sri Lanka's president has condemned violent clashes between the Prime Minister has denied that journalists were targeted. Well, these pictures were filmed in the moments around when Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. You can hear the
youth and the militants. We got to a point where we waited for Shireen to put on all her safety gear. She then reached us and we moved a few metres. We exposed ourselves to the army and the passers-by that we are Press TV. We arrived and within seconds there was the ground in the first few seconds with the shooting, and we were telling each other we were being shot at. The shooting continued for more than 3 minutes on the teams that were there.
Well, just a short while ago, I was speaking to our Middle East correspondent, Tim.
Further along, there have been clashes with the Israeli police, young men brandishing Palestinian flags. One was just carried along past me, clearly having been injured, perhaps by a rubber bullet to the shoulder. So there's considerable anger as well in Israel have been carried out over the last few weeks. During that raid, although she was wearing a bulletproof vest that clearly said press on it, she was still shot and died, well, she was pronounced dead. That is denied by eyewitnesses and indeed by the Palestinian authorities and by Al Jazeera, who say there was no fire. This was all on the Israeli military. And indeed, Al Jazeera, Shireen's
peace process, strongly condemning the killing and sending his deepest condolences to her family, and wished the speedy recovery of her fellow journalist who was injured in this incident. And he called for an immediate and thorough investigation for those responsible. Kate takes issue with that. Have a look at this.
Photographs, drawings and plans, just some of the objects that are helping to retell the story of an extraordinary discovery, the 3,000-year-old tomb of Tutankhamun.
This get across to the visitor is that we really want to highlight the contribution of the Egyptian team members.
Dr. Daniela Rosenau, an Egyptologist, co-curated this show. She says that while Carter led the team of archaeologists, there were dozens of locals in 1922, just months after Egypt gained independence from Britain. It was found largely intact and caused a global media frenzy. This led to people from all over the world, from scholars and archaeologists to even royalty, based in Cairo, who says the attention was both a blessing and a curse.
It did a favor for ancient Egypt in making it extremely popular, but it became popular in my own personal and professional view for all the wrong reasons. It had an impact on the well-layers of the ancient Egyptian history that has nothing to do with kings or queens or gold.
The curators of the show are offering a glimpse into this history, revealing a much fuller picture of a discovery that captured the imagination of the world.
Storm to a cyclonic storm over the last 24 hours, so the winds are easing in intensity, but still 90 kilometres an hour gusts with this across coastal areas of Andhra Pradesh. And it looks like the centre is just going to grind along the coastline of Andhra Pradesh whilst the system weakens. It won't be that hot in Karachi. We'll be into the high 30s here, I think, as we go through Thursday afternoon. There's that heavy rain from Asani affecting, as I say, Andhra Pradesh. But further north, the air's pretty humid, so there will be plenty of thunderstorm activity in Bangladesh and northeastern areas of India.
Powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely
a prison.
There is a human story.
Basic. Kenya.
This is our world.
I just seen the cops kill somebody.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global.
This is BBC World News. Our main headlines here. Sri Lanka's president has addressed the nation over the economic crisis in the country for the first time since from Ukraine and joined Russia. It fell to Russia less than a week into the war. Britain and Sweden have signed a security deal saying if either country came under attack, they would assist each other. Sweden is considering a possible application to join the NATO military.
Of discovery to explore new destinations around the globe and uncover hidden sides to some of the world's favourite holiday hotspots with the Travel Show team.
Travel Show. Making ancient Greece more accessible.
I mean, this is an extra part of the trip. This is the part that only we get.
Wow, look at that.
I love a historical site as much as the next person, but with narrow walkways, flights of stone steps and worn away surfaces, a visit can feel like a Herculean task.
And loads of steep ramps before you came to any sort of accessible pathway. But since then, things have changed.
The Acropolis is Greece's #1 tourist attraction, and pre-pandemic, over 3.
Which way am I going? This way? Thank you. Remember when I said it was a 15-minute hike up some stairs to get to the Acropolis? Hello.
But help is at hand. All I have to do is catch my breath and admire the scenery as I wait for the brand new lift built to comfortably accommodate 2 wheelchairs at a time. In the lift and using the Acropolis's new accessible paths, I get to experience all of this. To the ancient Greek goddess Athena, who gave the city of Athens its name.
Wow, I have never been so happy to see concrete. That is amazing. I've actually been here before, and the last time I was here, this was all of the renovations that have gone on here at the Acropolis. Now, some people have complained about the concrete slabs being laid down, saying that it's hiding the original features of the Acropolis and even wounding the stone here. But I've been
respectful to the site's diverse past. I'm heading down to the Acropolis Museum to meet a man who knows a thing or two about ancient history, and he believes the ancient Greeks themselves would have been okay with this.
Wow, that's incredible. Disabled gods or gods with disabilities. I'm learning so many new things. This is amazing.
And I'm also told that accessibility at the Acropolis is not a new thing.
Even in the archaic period, older people or pregnant women and so on, so that they have a good and easy accessibility towards the temple of their goddess.
And the conversation?
You cannot look with my eyes and I cannot look with yours.
There are plans in place to make the site even more accessible with the You might find yourself paying through the nose to get onto one of Athens' many beaches. Entry fees can push up into the hundreds of euros at somewhere like go and see a concert or play. Patti Smith and Diane Krall are both appearing this summer at the Odeon Herodes Atticus at the foot of the Acropolis. Now, if you're a fan of the classics, plays by Aeschylus, brand new metro line can whisk you there from central Athens in around 50 minutes. And Athens is known for its open-air cinemas, and throughout June, July and August you can catch classic films and new releases, starry skies in the city's squares, museums and parks, and some are totally free of charge.
Right, stay with us because still to come on the program.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivaled range of BBC, meaning our analysis is objective, unbiased, and I promise you with absolutely no spin. That's why we call our programme Unspun World.
On BBC World News.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
These are just some of the cats of Athens.
She's so cute.
I'm meeting Sambika, a volunteer at Athens-based cat charity 9 Lives.
We are a team, 9 Lives, and we feed every day here in Acropolis.
Definitely have their work cut out. So I've decided to help Sambika with the dinner time shift and get some grub out to these furry Athenians.
They are always together.
These two, yeah?
Yes.
Best friends. How did the pandemic?
Well, suddenly, because the town was empty, you could see so many cats. It revealed a lot of cats we opened. Hola, Diego, this is Diego.
Oh, you recognize because of the eye?
Yeah, he lost his eye recently. Hello, baby, come here.
No tourists meant no tavernas. And if it wasn't for volunteers, these guys would have gone home.
I do it also. When I ever... Animals mustn't eat actually our food. And sometimes it can be dangerous for them because usually they give.
Well, to finish up this week, we're leaving the cat food behind and heading off to Spain, where Kate Hardy-Buckley is on the lookout for some.
With its fertile soil, the sea air, and over 300 days of sunshine a year, this region is perfect for finding the best produce.
José Carlos García is one of Malaga's finest ambassadors of gastronomy.
Muy malagueño, y vamos a hacer una sopa fría que está hecha con almendra, aceite de oliva y ajo, muy poquito ajo, el ajo es un perfume. Le vamos a poner un poco de fruta, me encantaría hacer con pitaya, que es una fruta de mucho color. Vamos a poner algo del...
First up, I visit Finca La Torre, producers of one of the world's most premium extra virgin olive oils.
These like 100-year-old trees?
Yeah.
Wow.
And take another one. The olive oil is going to be totally different.
They look identical
Yeah,
to me.
but you know, I promise it's going to be totally different taste. In a few weeks, they will become a little bit yellow and they will be more tender. It's a signal that the olive oil comes.
Wow, look at that.
Unlike wine, which often improves with age, olive oil is best fresh.
It's delicious. I'm going to go back to London now, start. I've seen sardines, I've seen anchovies, boquerons. Doesn't get much fresher than this. This is absolutely amazing. The noise, the pace, all the chatter. Literally.
It's from southern Mexico. Its production in Spain has grown exponentially in the last few years.
Tiene muchas múltiples vitaminas, entonces también por la gente que hace deporte, que hace dieta,
Pues como nosotros decimos aquí, para la operación bikini. Que...
Oro líquido, para nosotros es lo más especial, ¿no?
It's totally changed color. It's a magnificent creamy white.
Es una competición, esto es una competición total.
José,
nuestro ajo blanco con pitaya, sardina, es Málaga.
So fresh, the crunch of the fruit, and then the sweet sliminess of the sardine. Absolute.
Carmen's back in Chile, where this time she comes face to face with the ancient civilization that's been given new UNESCO recognition for humanity's oldest examples of mummification.
Oh, y tiene 4,000 años de antigüedad.
So, make sure you catch that if you can, and also check us out on social media. But for now, from me, Adia Depitan, and the rest of the Travel Show team here in
Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Job. Can farmers, scientists, and innovators overcome these challenges to protect the future of our food? Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
Evangelical Christians.
Ele defende a família acima de tudo, né? E Deus acima de todos.
This October, he looks set to face his old rival, the former President Lula da Silva, in an epic battle for re-election.
Russia's war on Ukraine has destroyed businesses, it's ruined houses, and it has wrecked lives. And more than a month after Russian forces were pushed back from Kiev, the horror stories of life under occupation are still